Today I want to take a look at the Power Apps Center of Excellence Starter Kit. And here we have a blog post from Microsoft talking about the features, benefits, and what the COE, Center of Excellence, offers us. There's a couple of different things. Administration, nurture, support operations are how they outline it. But the central function is to provide more reporting and governance to manage the Power Apps environment. There's a number of different details it gets into, but we'll come right on down to the kit features. So what we're looking at is a open source GitHub project we can install to our tenant that gives us more features than out of the box. And this is something that you opt into, that's community driven, it's getting updates and innovation because it's open source. And so while it might not be a native feature in the native menus for everyone, it is a helpful feature that we can opt into and get some extra ideas from the community, extra reporting to make our environment easier to manage. And we do have a couple of things like the set new app owner for changing app ownership. That helps with governance. So if a developer transitions to a different role, leaves the organization, you get a new point of contact, establish a new owner for that particular app. DLP comes with a pair of Canvas apps to help with editing and customizing those DLP policies. But then also just things about the logging and reporting, the Power BI dashboards that are part of this to get a better feel for what does our environment have? How many environments are there? How many apps do we have? How many flows? Like what does our footprint look like as power users and citizen developers are adopting and deploying more things in Power Apps and on the Power Platform? So having that visibility with reporting, really just having the extra app for changing ownership is pretty helpful too. But here's an example of what the dashboard would look like for the reporting on our usage, and then the data collections that go behind all of this. So the COE Starter Kit has a download, which gives us a zip file. It is hosted over on GitHub, and there's a few different things that you need as far as going through the install and the setup process, which we'll take a look at next. So from the Microsoft documentation, we'll follow the steps on the COE Starter Kit. They are broken down into 4 columns here in the center. We have the download, and then we have setup admin, setup govern, and setup nurture. So each one of these has different requirements, different stages, different components to configure. The one we really want to focus on is setup admin. So what we need to do is inventory the tenant. One of the key inputs of this entire COE system is going to be quality data about the inventory of the tenant, what systems we have, and how active they are. So from that, we're going to have different daily admin tasks that are collecting data about the apps, flows, and makers that exist in our environment, and it lay the foundation for the reports and other components that come later. So here we're going to go navigate to flow.microsoft.com, and we're going to set up a handful of data connections to support that inventory and gather. So inside the data heading, we're going to find connections, and then we're going to do create new connection. And from this, we're actually going to pick out a couple of different things. We're going to need all of these various connections that are down the left-hand side, and in total, that's going to make 15 items. Now, it'd be a pretty boring video to watch me click through each one, but I think you guys get the general idea. That what we do is we come into connections, we click add new, and then we need to go find that specific connection like approvals and hit create. It says adding connection. Okay, great. And then we repeat that over and over. I'm going to go ahead and do all 15 and then bring the recording back. And just to give you guys a quick idea of what the menu looks like during the add, I mean, we do have things like Power Apps for Admin, Maker, and Power Platform Admin. So, that's going to cover a couple things like this one here, and these two here. And yeah, just kind of showing a little display of what that's going to look like visually as we're making connections. Didn't want to do all 15 this way because it's kind of a tedious process, but definitely just showing you the new connection dialog. Scroll down to the letter you're looking for the prefix, so letter P for power. And then from that point, you'll be able to go ahead and pick the connection you want. Create button. Might get a pop-up window to log in. Click on your name to continue. And that's what the new connection looks like. Now with all of our connections created, we can switch over and take a look at some of the environment variable values. So here we're wanting to collect a couple of different things about our tenant. All in all, there's going to be 6 of them. The admin email, okay, who would we send messages to? Power Platform Maker 365 group, which will contain your Power Platform Makers. Create a group if needed. Okay, don't have a group. We'll have to do that. The Power Automate environment variable. Yeah, and that can be a little funny for GCC and GCC High if you're doing government tenants. For me, I just navigate over here to I keep calling it MS Flow, but Power Automate. And on that one, we'll just collect the URL off the address bar, and there's a GUID number inside of it. Cool. Power Maker environment variable. Same thing, but this will be from make.powerapps.com. All right, we'll go ahead and bring that one over. Got another GUID number. Power Player environment variable. Include the trailing slash. Interesting. It says include the trailing slash over and over. So they like the trailing slash. And then we need our Azure Tenant ID. Couple of ways of doing that one, but I think my favorite is going to portal.azure.com, locating the tenant itself. There we go. Copying tenant ID and holding that into Notepad. So now I've collected this table of environment variables that the article mentions, and we're ready to import the solution. A lot of people are going to jump in and import the solution straight away. Don't do that. You need to make the 15 connections, get some of these GUID numbers, get a few things in place first. All right, and here we have a couple different things. For the group, we want a Power Platform Maker group. Makers are only going to this group with the admin, maker group flow. How you communicate with your admins. Interesting. So I'm going to call this, we're going to use the default settings. We're going to call it Power Platform Maker. And we'll even reference the article here in the description. And we'll assign owners and go ahead and pick out myself. And go ahead and we have our group pretty much ready. Go ahead and add myself as a member and an owner. Email address, I mean, we'll just call it Maker. Seems okay. Create a team, we'll go with all defaults, click Create Group. And now we have the group created, which we can use as an input for other parts. So in loading the solution, when we get the zip file, we have the managed installing production environment, use the core components managed, okay. If you're installing to a Dataverse for Teams environment, use the Teams zip, okay. I think we'll be using the first one, and we'll go ahead and import our solution. So downloading the zip from GitHub gives us a couple different files to work with. We're looking at the core components here for the zip file. When we go to make.powerapps.com, again, that's make.powerapps. We want the solution icon, which is the very last one on the bottom left. And when we click that on the bottom left, we get into solutions, and we want to hit the import button at the top. Now from the import, we want to go ahead and grab that file. And we are looking for the core components managed. Now remember, there were two. There was a Teams and then a one without Teams. We're going to go with the without one. We'll go ahead and navigate forward. All right, and here it shows the version number. It says enable plugin steps and flows. We'll click next. And whoa, there are 21 items inside the zip. This is incredible. And here's all of those different connections we were working earlier for our mapping. And they're all populated with an identity in a beautiful positive way because we did the prep work and because we created the connections. So we'll hit next and come on in here. Application Center ID, the Azure Tenant ID. This is where our input and prep work comes in. I was collecting all of these into Notepad. This is the make.powerapps URL. Yep. The Power Platform Maker group ID. We created the group, not sure about the ID. And this is where the group was created successfully. So let's see if we close that down and we open the group details. Kind of a big number up here that looks like a GUID. We'll go with it. We'll put that in as the ID. All right. The Power Automate environment variable, including geographic location. So for me, that is us.flow, and it ends with a big GUID number. So that's your geographic component, the environment. Let's see, the player URL used by your environment. Yeah. Now, I mean, it's all kind of default for me. Yeah. Power Platform Maker Group ID, okay. The maker URL example make that powers. I don't know if I'm supposed to give it the environment all the way over to home. We're going to try it and we'll adjust if needed. Admin email, I'll put in myself here for the tenant email. Approval admin, that's fine. Leave blank on import, okay. Azure version of the client secret for the app, text version, command center, client, Azure secret. Okay, so this is the service messages. The registered to fetch the Azure and text version. Not real sure about these last two. Okay, this one we should leave blank. All right, and we will. The client ID for service messages. So I'm almost there. Looks like there's a little bit more on this part about the service messages. So I didn't see this one in the documentation, so I'm kind of creating this on my own, but I made a new app ID with client secret. I'm giving it 365 management, app permissions, and I'm checking everything. Last one's probably the one we need, servicehealth.read for the health information. But we're going to add all permissions. We're going to consent it for the tenant. And now we have an app ID and secret so that we can go ahead and put something in for these values just to try to do this correctly from the initial import. The directions did not directly address this one, but kind of took our best shot, and I think that's going to be what we need. Now, the import process can take a long time. Documentation was saying maybe 15 minutes by itself, at which point you'll be on the solution screen watching the currently importing, waiting for it to show completed. So we'll pause and let that run. Now that our solution has been successfully imported, we're going to see a couple of things on the Power Apps menu. So when we navigate to Solutions on the left-hand side, we're actually going to see the first item, Center of Excellence Core Components listed. And easy to find because it starts with the letter C, so it's high in the alphabet at the top. And we see that the Center of Excellence imported successfully. We also have a prompt up here about environment variables, kind of a warning. And this is interesting because 3 of the ones listed here were really kind of blank from the import. And this one's a link to a Yammer or Teams community, which is a little bit maybe optional for support. This is the environment request app URL. So that might exist now that the app has been loaded. The Developer Compliance Center, yeah, that's another Canvas app. So these are Canvas apps that are created during import. So now we could potentially make a link to them. And we'll go ahead and navigate over and populate that first. And opening a new tab over to make.powerapps.com, we can see the app environment request form is online and available. We'll go ahead and allow for the permissions. We're going to copy the link to that one and bring it back over to the environment variable. So this is the URL for that one particular app. And we want to go ahead and save and close. So that brings our environment variables a little bit closer to being finished. And now that we have the import complete, we can take a look at some of the data collection flows. There are child flows, setup flows, and we have inventory flows. All these need to be enabled to make the application fully functional. So COE uses them for all kinds of different under the hood operations. Here we have helpers for things like sending email, Canvas apps. We have check for deleted Canvas apps, check deleted for Power Virtual Assistant, PVA, but also model-driven apps and Canvas and Cloud Flows and custom connectors, third-party elements that we're using for data connections. So there's a lot of things that these data collections are going to support, and we want to make sure they're all enabled. So the 11 child flows we're looking at, we'll go verify that those are enabled. Clicking on the COE component solution, we can browse into it and see a lot of the different resources on the left-hand side. So this is definitely something we want to pay attention to, that there's 186 resources, which is incredible. 186. And just looking into flows, we want to make sure that we have the 11 child flows that were just listed on the article. And they're kind of easy to find because of the naming pattern. So a certain group of them all start with the word helper, which is going to be the 5 down here. And I see all 5 matching the Microsoft article, and they're turned to on, which is awesome. And if we come up here to clean up helpers, we're going to have, I believe, 6 of these. So all the cleanup helpers are accounted for, and they're all set to on. So between the 6 and the 5, that covers the 11 child flows we're expecting to see. And we also want to go look at the setup flows, make sure that these are enabled. And checking the list for setup flows, this one's not counted. It's kind of interesting. They have a bulleted list, but didn't provide a number. All in, it looks like 9 bullets. And going over to make.power apps, I can check those. I've highlighted all 9. We're saying status on, status on. This one says off, which I think is kind of interesting. And this one is on. Emails. This group here has 5 of them turned on. So I think it's matching for the most part. But we might have one. Admin configure emails. Sync template 3, configure emails. Excuse support. Actually, we're good. We're good. This particular one that's marked off is out of scope. So we have the child flows, all 11. We have the setup flows, all 9. Now we can take a look at the inventory flows. Sync flows run daily. Some of the cleanups are every 2 weeks. So each one of these jobs has a different frequency. And I know there's a lot of them, but this is the only way it can collect all the data needed to support the apps and the reporting. So we'll go through and check that all of these are enabled as well, just to verify the install. So here we have 16 flows for the inventory, and just checking those on the deployment side to make sure that everybody's accounted for. We kind of go through and highlight them, and that way we can look at it side by side and make sure they're enabled. All right, with the inventory flows, kind of have a mixture here, highlighting all of them in the system. Some are on, some are off. Overall, they're marked to off, and it looks like this one is marked on, but most of these are actually off. So we'll go ahead and toggle those and see what we can do to modify. Okay, and by manually clicking the 3 dots on each line item, I was able to click turn on and activate each one of these. So we have on across the board, very cool. And that gives us all of our inventory flows. So now we can move into the next step, which is the Command Center app. All right, and the next step for setting up the Command Center app is going to read the M365 Message Center. So this was the special step that I was kind of looking at earlier at the environment variables that we needed to make an app registration and grant it permissions for service message read all on the graph, which I already did as part of the environment variables. It's just kind of odd that they have this further down in the middle of the instructions for the client secret because we really needed to load the environment variables higher up when we were importing. So these steps might be in the middle. I kind of ran them already as part of the import, and that includes the client secret, yes, and the client ID so that we have the connectivity to Message Center. There are some different steps if you're doing a GCC high tenant. For government cloud, apparently the graph connections are a little bit different on the way they structure the REST call. So if you are running that environment, you need to follow slightly different steps. And yeah, we have that part set up, and that was done already as part of the import. Next, we want to look at the telemetry data for audit log sync, and we'll take a look at that one. And getting closer to the end of the install steps, actually coming together very quickly. There's a lot of settings here too that you can kind of adjust as far as how the COE is working, and more than maybe the environment variables by default values, this table describes all of them for what the defaults are and would you want to change those defaults. And just because you've loaded the COE doesn't mean that you're fixed into the way that Microsoft had designed it by default. Maybe you want to do something with formatting the emails using a little more CSS, and what type of inventory you want, if you're getting too much data or not enough. So just kind of remember that there are default environment variables we can change without having to be a developer to get different functionality from COE. But really the major items are going to be confirming the audit log sync and then setting up the dashboard. So let's look at the audit log next. And with the audit log solution, we want to come into the drill down article, which goes through all the steps of setting up the custom data connector. So here we want to go into custom connectors, locate the one that was imported from the solution, and edit to give it the Azure App ID and client secret, these values here. And it's going to be part of the security tab. So in our system at make.powerapps.com, we go into our custom connectors, locate the one for editing. We come into the security tab, and the name of the connector is Office 365 Management API, and it's the only one that's out there. And probably for your tenant, the only one as well, because making a custom connector is kind of high effort. And we'll go down to the very bottom and hit edit, and we'll be able to put in some of the values. So we want to populate the client ID and secret. So, okay, there's the required fields in red. We'll put down the client ID. We'll also put in the client secret. And the resource URL, kind of interesting. It mentions it here to leave the login URL, right? But for the resource URL, do manage.office.com for a commercial tenant. And it's .us for GCC and .mil for DoD. So you may have to change the domain name a little bit. But for most people, manage.office.com is going to be the resource URL, manage.office.com. Yeah, that looks good. We'll go ahead and click Update Connector at the top. And here we'll see a message come back that it's successfully updated. And we do have our ID, secret, login URL. Tenant ID is common, already done. That looks good. And now that we have our custom connector updated, we can move to the next step, which is going to be working on the Power BI dashboard. This has its own article where we get into a little bit of the configuration of the dashboard. So let's see, you can get the dashboard by downloading the compressed file, extract zip, and there's a PBIT for Teams environment, production environment. We're going to go with the first one, production environment, just like we did with the other import, and then there'll be a few steps to set up the dashboard. And for setting up the Power BI dashboard, we're going to need the environment URL from Power Platform Admin Center. Here we'll click the gear in the top right, then Admin Center. And in the top of the display, we're going to have the environment URL. On this particular tenant, I only have one environment right here for US region. We'll click the environment name. And then there's the URL, which I can copy the link. That's something that we're going to need as we go into the Power BI publishing. Now there's an alternate method here. If you're installing in a Dataverse for Teams environment, mine's different, so we won't be needing those steps. We're using the production method. And there are two different files that we can use for Power BI. There's the production one and the Teams one. We'll be focusing on the top one, the production one, and then giving it that URL address that we just picked up from Power Platform Admin Center. So when opening the PBIT file with Power BI Desktop locally, it says that we do not include prefixes and postfixes. So prefix HTTPS, do not include it, or the / suffix. It's kind of funny they call it a postfix instead of a prefix. That's interesting because they usually hear it as suffix. But in the event, we'll take the / off the right-hand side, we'll take the HTTP off the left-hand side, and we are DNS name only, and that's how we open the Power BI desktop. At this point, I'm getting a login prompt that it wants to authenticate to the tenant, which we'll go ahead and do. And I'm actually getting an error message. This is interesting. So, okay, between the Teams and production, two different files. If you are doing the production one, you do want HTTPS, because here it's giving an error trying to use HTTP. So now I need to find a way to modify that variable and potentially reload. So for the production file, we're going to open it again, and we are going to use the HTTPS prefix, and matching that should help to get beyond the login screen. So here we're given the login prompt. We click sign in. I'm actually already authenticated, so it remembers my name from before. It says you are currently signed in with the beautiful connect button. So now we can move forward. And now Power BI starts refreshing its data sources. And we see a lot of different status items here with a scroll bar about loading data into the model. And when it starts showing kilobytes and starts showing transfer numbers, that's where we know that it's moving data successfully. So here we see 2 KB, 100 bytes, 100 bytes. Very cool. And good news, we now have Power BI open, and we can see the layout of the canvas and all the different tabs across the bottom. There's a lot here. It says page 7 of 42. That's incredible. I mean, 42 pages of dashboards is a lot to soak up. So this would take some time to explore kind of on your own. There's an introduction tab where it talks about the various 41, I guess, different reports that you can drill through. And the introduction tab is probably the place to get started, just to see which stage of the life cycle you're working on. Is it monitor, govern, or nurture? And then what some of the different dashboards within that might be. A lot of material here, probably deserves its own video separately, but we are in the report. We did give it the parameter, and we were able to see data moving as part of the refresh. All good news. So let's go back to the article. Now that we completed those steps, we did have the dashboard open, refresh. They talk about a little bit of troubleshooting in case you have difficulty authenticating. There's an optional config for embedded apps. I don't think we need that right now. It's essentially, bringing in some of the Power Apps that you can grant to certain tiles in the dashboard. And what we'll do is go ahead and publish the dashboard so that we can share it with others and access it on the web. So we'll click the File menu, Publish, and Publish to Power BI. We'll save the changes to a local file also. And here I'm saving to the same folder, but just naming it with the prefix of published. There we go. And here we can select a workspace. On my default tenant, all we have is my workspace. Of course, you can create your own. Probably good reasons for doing that. Make a team workspace or a COE workspace just to more easily hold other reports you might need long term, share permissions, these sort of things. But we did successfully publish, and we can click the open link to view in the browser. Very cool. Now we can see our fully published COE dashboard live in the browser. And on the left-hand side, you see navigation for all of the 42 pages, starting with the introduction. So that was on the bottom in the desktop. It's on the left in the browser. But more importantly, because it's browser-based, we have everything that we need to now share it, schedule the refreshing, embed with websites, all kinds of different cool stuff that we can do with managing permissions to grant others in our team access, the share button, open a conversation in Teams. Yep, and here we can go ahead and upgrade the Pro license. We'll say try for free. And this is where we can share the link over email, Teams, give it to our coworkers. And this is really an essential piece of the whole experience. I mean, taking the PBIT, the template, and giving it the correct connection with the URL, refreshing the data and publishing, that helps you as the publisher of the report. But we really want to get in here and use the share button to give this data to our other team members for decision making and support. I mean, if the flows are collecting inventory in the background, if the Power BI dashboard has great ways of looking at the data, this is the final and key step where we share it with the rest of our team so that they have the information they need to support, plan, and grow the platform. So this covers the Power BI step of the COE install. And just as a recap, we loaded this solution, which came with a number of flows. We made a Azure app registration to help with the M365 Admin Center service announcements, any news from Microsoft. We have all of the flows activated and scheduled, and we're in a spot where we have the COE up and running. There's a little bit to it. I thought it'd be helpful to make a video just because the article instructions, there's a lot of detailed steps to consider here. So if you found the video helpful, please leave a comment, and thank you for watching.